morning, everyone, and welcome to Live with Dan. As you can see, Dan's not here this morning. He is taking a well-needed long weekend, but I am your host, Crystal Weiss, and I am joined by a very special guest today, and who I'll introduce shortly. And we are so excited that you have joined us today. If you're joining us across YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook, we are so glad you're here and joining us for Live with Dan. This is June 9th, and we're just so excited to be kicking off the summer programming with our special guest, Jill Kushner Bishop, Ph.D., which I see you did not put on there, but I wrote it down many times.
Thank you. I finally paid off the student loans, so.
Oh, there you go. I took so many notes today since Dan's not here. She is the founder and CEO of Multilingual Connections. She holds a Ph.D. in linguistic anthropology from UCLA, and she's here to talk to us about the importance in multilingualism in market research. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Dan,
oh, thanks. Usually we have a little sidekick or co-host Danielle is here, and I can always make a joke. It's Live with Danielle. But she is also has some other priorities this weekend. Our great producer Danielle, who was always in the background, is getting married next week. So it's just me and Dan trying to figure this out this summer by ourselves.
You'll be great. Already off to a great start.
Oh, thanks. Well, we're so glad you're here. And honestly, as someone who is not very gifted with other languages, I am excited about this conversation because I do try my best. I took 8 years of Latin, and that did not seem to stick at all, which is disappointing, but also not very useful, frankly. So tell us a little bit about yourself and Multilingual Connections, and at least one fun fact.
Sure. So I always loved language. I started learning Hebrew when I was in 4th grade and really loved everything about it. And then I started doing Spanish in high school, took French, took sign language for a summer. And so language is always a part of what I was interested in learning. My grandparents spoke Yiddish in addition to English. And so we'd hear little bits of Yiddish spoken. My parents knew a little bit of that. It's not something that I learned, but I was always interested in language and why some people spoke language, why some people passed it down to their children, why they didn't. And so it was just kind of like in the back of my mind. And originally I was a high school Spanish teacher, but I loved traveling. Ooh. I loved being in other language surrounded by other languages and cultures. And I would teach English abroad. And then I kind of filed that away, started teaching high school Spanish, but I wasn't ready for that to be it. So I looked into grad programs and found linguistic anthropology, which is looking at the intersection of language and culture and how people use language. And so I realized that was what I wanted to do, at least at the moment. So grad program there, did my field work in Israel among speakers of a dying dialect of Spanish. And so lots of interviews, lots of informal conversations, observations, 240 hours of high 8 cassette tapes in my basement, that many of which I transcribed by hand in 3 languages. And then, wow. You asked about like, how did I get into market research, fast forward like all of these years and little decisions that you make along the way that take you in a completely different direction, unexpected directions. But I started Multilingual Connections 18 years ago, originally with focus. We were going into restaurants and hotels and manufacturing facilities where there were multilingual employees and helping them learn English, job-specific English, so that they could do their jobs more safely and more effectively. Promoted. We were doing Spanish training for supervisors. And then I quickly got a request for a translation. And so we added translation. And then a few years later, we got requests for focus group and interview transcription from Spanish into English. And no one was doing multilingual transcription at the time. So we added that. Wow. And then it was survey translation and then subtitling and voiceover. And most recently, bilingual moderation. So now, in addition to 75 languages for our translation and transcription services, we have about 25 languages covered with experienced bilingual and bicultural researchers. So lots going on these last 18
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I saw in your bio a little bit about the working in the different workplaces, and it really made me realize, I have some I worked at Starbucks for years. I've been a waitress, and there is those moments where you're like, you just have to trust that, like, you're not going to burn your hand or you're not going to slip, or like people really, you have that kitchen language,
Right.
but it's not anything formal.
Right. So learning the language specific
Hmm.
to the workplace, you don't have to learn how
Yeah.
to conjugate verbs and talk about
No.
politics, but there's a very functional, very
Yeah.
necessary set of things to say, customer service related, or calling
Yeah.
in sick, or reporting an accident, or when I was working for Chipotle, overseeing those language and culture programs, asking about spice levels and quantities, salsas, and what does hold the cheese mean? Hold, why would you hold cheese? Thinking about things that are
Yeah.
such common expressions for us, but when you're a speaker of another language, jumping into that environment with
Hmm.
music playing, lines out the door, all the chaos, all the stress of
For
making the
sure.
perfect burrito, like that is, if you can make that burrito correctly, that's success. And so it was a
Right.
really interesting opportunity, that role, to help improve language in the workplace.
Yeah.
And that's not what we do anymore, but
Yeah.
the connections are still the same. It's about helping create connections across language and culture.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And what is a fun fact about you? I love, this is my.
A fun fact is that starting in the pandemic, we started fostering puppies. And so since
Ooh.
I think fall of 2020 until now, we've fostered 32 puppies, not all at the same time. Usually for 1 week at a time in pairs. And so we'd foster for a week and then take a few weeks off and then foster again. And it's the pace is less intense now than it
Chaotic.
was when we were all stuck at home, but it was such an energy changer and a spark of joy every time those puppies were around,
Oh,
that made our family happy and everybody who came by happy. So
I love that. And where are you based out of?
in the Chicago area, in Evanston, just north of
Oh,
Chicago.
that's so fun. I love Chicago. We have our Question Pro as an office, or office. We're all remote, so I'm going to
Yeah,
say office like this. We have enough people up there to qualify as an office if they
nice.
decided to meet together.
Yeah, it's such a
And
great place. And especially when
oh,
it's sunny and beautiful, like it's been the last couple of weeks, everybody's out and celebrating and just enjoying these gorgeous days that are few and far between.
I love that. Well, that sounds like you've had a really interesting, I would say, like, career arc in leading, oh no, I go multilingual
Multilingual
connections.
connections.
I was like, I'm going to say so many words
No
here, but
worries. It's a
it sounds
mouthful.
like you've had a really interesting arc. And can you tell me, a little bit about the importance of, or maybe some of the gaps that you saw coming into the market research industry that you were like, wow, this is really, they're missing an opportunity to have correct sampling, is something we worry about a lot here,
Sure.
is making sure we're not excluding anyone. I think so often for the goal of completes in the, as far as surveys are concerned, sometimes exclusivity happens whether there's the intent there or not.
Mhm.
What were some of the gaps that you saw coming into market research that you wanted to kind
Yeah.
of fill?
Sure. So I would say three of them. One is conducting research in English among speakers of non-native speakers of English, and I'll go back and
Mhm.
talk a little bit about each. So that is certainly one. Using machine translation with no human edits,
Oh,
for content translation, and the other is using somebody on your team who speaks the language to translate, thinking that you're going to be that you're saving money, and when you're not necessarily. And so just a little bit of more detail around each of them. Sometimes doing work in English makes sense. So you might be working in countries where you're doing a B2B study, and the people that you're interviewing or doing or surveying work in English. If their lives,
mhm.
their work lives are lived in English, you can probably conduct the research in English. But if you really want to connect with people and hear their authentic voices, you need to do that in their language. Otherwise,
Hmm.
you're going to miss your, or at least potentially miss, so many insights.
Right.
So that's one. The machine translation point, it's certainly better than it ever has been.
Yeah.
And it's getting better all the time. However, you miss nuance and you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you read an output of a translation from machine translation and it sounds great, but you don't know if it missed something. You don't know if there was a typo or something that was poorly worded in the original, and what comes out sounds right, but you don't know if something was missed. And
Interesting.
yeah, and then we also hear from research and from other industries, because we do work across a variety of different industries, that they use somebody who's bilingual on their team, and sometimes that can work. And certainly, you want to leverage the language and cultural expertise of your in-house people, but oftentimes, as a cost saving measure, they, instead of sending it to professionals, they just have that bilingual person translate it. But you don't know if they're a good translator. You don't know if how to translate. And it's not like, hey, you speak Spanish, do this. And so
like, what type of Spanish, what region, what,
right.
like,
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. We have different translators for Spain than for Latin America, for France versus Canada. So that's really important. But were you educated in that country? Do you know all of the written norms, the orthographic norms? So we had a client, an HR client that we did Spanish translations for, and they gave us feedback that everything was great, but we just forgot to capitalize the days of the weeks and the months. But in Spanish, you don't capitalize those. And so that's something, it's a small detail, but the goal when you're translating, it should read as if it were written for you in the original language and not read like a translation. And so if you see those differences, the capitalization being off, it makes you wonder, like, wait, who wrote this? Who translated this? You know, is this intended for me? And so, or spelling, or just the high level of grammatical and cultural nuance, is that there? And so working with a partner, whether it's us or another agency, having that partner who has processes in place, who has the right technology in place, who has the right vetting and onboarding process for their translators, it's really important to make sure that you're getting the quality survey. Because if your survey is wrong, then what happens to your insights? So
right. And I can see, like, even subconsciously, if I receive a survey that I'm like, oh, somebody didn't write this correctly, I won't complete it. Yeah. Not that I don't want to, not that my intent isn't there, but it's like, nah, this isn't, like, you just, that subconscious bias essentially comes out, whether, intent is to fill it out or not. That is really, I mean, it's really I think if you write surveys correctly, which we talk about so much here, just in like basic survey practices, if you write them, you can have all the intent in the world, but if you don't do it like correctly, nobody wants to fill it out, and then you don't get those insights.
And you think about the level of professionalism that you at your company and others bring to that survey creation. There's so much thought that goes into it and so much intention. And so you want to have that same amount of thought on the translation side. And, and another gap is just waiting until the last minute or not thinking about it from the beginning. We get emails and calls at the last minute. They're like, we forgot to translate this. We didn't think about translating it. Can you translate it? How soon can we get it back? And
you're like, that will be an upcharge. Thank you.
And we'll do it, of course. But if there's time in advance to really anticipate it, plan for it, develop relationships with your translation partner, make sure that you have everything lined up. And of course, there are rush projects that are going to happen, and that's fine. But going in when you have a project coming up. So plan for it and budget that time and that money up front so that it can all work as smoothly as possible. There are enough unknowns in research and enough times you need to scramble. Let that not be one of them.
Because I'm assuming then you could also change the way certain questions are asked, because in different cultures, the expectation of asking something might be different.
Absolutely.
So they aren't, I would assume, this is just an educated guess from our discussion, is that a lot of times it's not a one-to-one translation. You have to really change not the intent. The intent stays the same, but the way you ask it might change.
Absolutely. Right. And you might need to localize it. For example, if you're doing a screener and you have, who do you live with? And in English, you might have living with a child under 18. In some countries, 20 is the age of adulthood. So 18 might sound like, why are you asking me about 18? I have a 19-year-old at home, and I consider that a minor child. And so you again want to make sure that you have that cultural understanding. Do you live with friends versus do you live with roommates? That might be more or better received by your target audience. And so thinking about those things, what needs to be localized to the culture and not just translated word for word.
Interesting. Yeah, I read Trevor Noah's Born a Crime,
Hmm.
and it talked so much about the importance of language and how he was able to use, I mean, he's fluent in like five
Seven
or so
languages.
many, yeah, like so
Amazing.
many,
Yeah,
and how he was able to use that to kind of like earn acceptance or earn his way in and his right to be in different places. And
absolutely.
as someone who's not talented in languages, I always thought it was an insult to try and use other people's language. But my parents live in the Middle East part time. And so when I'm over there, you learn Arabic usually when I'm there. Like
Yeah,
I forget it every time.
sure.
But I started using like thank you, and I know how to get home in a taxi, and really just kind of like leaning into it more.
Yeah.
Do you think that so often people, especially I would say maybe stateside, because we're not so like in Oklahoma, they just speak a different version of Oklahoma English. We're not like sitting up against France or German,
Right.
where we're so like, I would say like around different languages constantly. Do you think we have a different kind of cultural approach to it than maybe other countries do?
Absolutely. I mean, there has been such resistance in the US around other languages. I mean, for the
Mhm.
longest time, it was optional to learn a language, a second language. And if you did learn, it was in high school, as opposed to most places around the world that start learning English or another language in school at the very beginning when you have the
Mhm.
most opportunity to learn. And there's hesitation, people get upset at press 1, press 2 on the phone for Spanish or for other languages. There has culturally been, and this is a generalization, of course,
Yeah.
but US culture has not typically been embracing of other languages. And so it's a miss. I started studying Spanish in high school. There were a
Mhm.
couple kids that started in middle school, but that was just not even, it was so not on the radar.
Yeah.
Hebrew was just a kind of a family thing, but in terms of like formal education, and this was a long time ago, but
Oh yeah,
it
but
just wasn't a value. And then
mhm.
you see around the world where, of course, English, but of course, all of these other languages too. I lived in
Mhm.
Barcelona and my friends they spoke 5 languages fluently. And the connections that you can make and the
Yeah.
worldviews that you can connect with and understand, that happens through language and through being able to have a real
Yeah.
conversation with people. But back to your question about Arabic, for example, I mean, just those pleasantries, being able to say hello, good morning, thank you, it shows
Mhm.
that you're trying. Ultimately,
Yeah.
you will likely never be able to have a full conversation in Arabic at this point, and that's okay. But
Girl, that's like my dad. My dad's like 70, and he's like, I want to like that's his goal before he
yeah,
dies now. He's
that's
like, I'm gonna
wonderful.
lose, and I'm just like, okay, Dad, go
Go
for
for
it.
it. Yeah. But I think it's also like understanding who you're talking to, and if you think, and the intention that you're bringing to the conversation, and if they're more fluent in your language than you are in theirs, then you can use your pleasantries, and then most likely they'll want to switch.
Yeah.
When I'm in Israel and I speak Hebrew, usually people switch to English, and it upsets me though because I want to practice, but they also want to
Yes.
practice, or they feel that their English is better than my Hebrew, so they'd rather just make it easy for me. So there's so many different ways of kind of thinking about this, but
Mhm.
being kind, learning some keywords, and understanding some of the cultural traditions as well, to make
Mhm.
sure that when you're showing up in the right way.
Yeah, we talk a lot about being able to show up as your full self,
Hmm.
whether that be in the workplace or in life. At Question Pro, we are about 400 people worldwide, and only about a third, like 30 of us in the States.
Yeah.
And so we work hard to have like a global um, company, but it's like every once in a while those day to day we have to work. We work in English, but every once in a while I'll say something and people are like, what are you saying? I was like, well, I'm from Kansas. So I've got this weird colloquialism,
Yeah.
and we just have coming as our full selves but with good intent, and just being like, Crystal, I don't know what you're saying, or so and so, I don't you're saying something and I don't understand, and just being honest about that has
Absolutely.
really just like, I would changed our dynamic a little bit, just to be like, it's not embarrassing. It's just like, you're probably saying something kind of weird that I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and just asking with the goal of understanding. And
Yeah.
back to work, if you're in the world of insights, how can you expect your participants to show up as their true selves, as their authentic selves, if you're not conducting the research in their language and asking them to be
Mhm.
someone else? Because you are, in most cases, unless you're exceptionally fluent, you are somebody else in another language. I lived in Barcelona in college, and I used to think that my friends there only knew me as Jill and not as Jill. And Jill is relaxed and can tell a joke and more comfortable. And Jill was like more formal, and I'd have to kind of think things through. And I always missed the opportunity to tell a joke because I didn't really know how to do it in Spanish. And so it was like a different identity and a different personality. And so I couldn't be my true self in Spanish. And so thinking about what that implies for market research and how to ensure that we're giving that opportunity to people to be their true selves, whether it's through bilingual moderation or survey translation or using an interpreter so that they can report out in their own words, in their own language.
It would also skew data. Like, sorry, I just think as I go, because I'm not naturally a market researcher. I came in from a different space, and I was just like, in my head, I'm like, if you are only getting questions from people that like speak your own language, you're missing huge opportunities for, like, your insights are skewed.
Yeah.
Right. And so then the products you build are skewed, or the decisions you make are skewed.
Yeah.
And it's like, that just like,
yeah, it's a pretty big aha moment.
You're like, oh yeah, that's why I started a company.
Yeah. But it's still, and most people get it, but even if you get it, then you still have to prioritize it, budget for it, add time in your workflow. So it's one thing to intellectually know that makes sense, but then functionally and practically, it is an effort to make that happen, to put it into place. But it's so important.
So I have to ask the question everyone's asking. What about AI? What about Chat GPT?
Sure.
I come from Kansas, which doesn't have a very heavy accent. My mom worked real hard to make sure I didn't say wash instead of wash. That's what she says. Or she says crick, and I say creek because I say it properly, and she says crick. So she made sure that her children speak correctly, for sure.
Well, but it's not about correctness, because there's no correct version. It's all about just difference there. I'm
there you go.
Your mom. Tell her I said that.
I always ask her how to spell wash, which is probably not kind. But that is, I can go into Chat GPT and say, hey, write me an invite for, we met at IIEX a couple weeks ago. Write me an invite for Question Pro Palooza as a Texan. And it was like, it went this way.
Right.
And I was like, okay. So how do you see that affecting research in the future, or that machine learning, like people just depending too much on it?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the machine translation conversation, that AI, of course, it's going to be impacting the language industry, both from the production of translation to the workflows, of course, but in the same way that humans are essential with machine translation, because you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes there's so many different ways of interpreting a statement. The word for example, you can go yeah, but no, or no, or yeah. Those all mean different things, and you know what I'm saying in each of those. But
I do. Yeah.
but the machines don't get that yet. And so, trust but verify, or don't trust yet. But that's where, there's so much in flux right now that trusting your essential content to GPT or to MT without a human validating and doing side-by-side comparison, it's just too risky. And maybe in the future that won't be the case, but right now humans are essential for preserving that accuracy and nuance, and being able to have an output that you trust if you're gambling your business on it.
Woo, that's a good line. But do you think that this is, obviously there's pros and cons, and you've talked a little bit about, your anthropology aspect in linguistics, about saving some of those old languages. Do you think plugging them into a system like that saves them? Or like, how do you see it helping or hurting those, like, kind of regional specific dialects or ancient languages?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And because I'm not working in endangered languages at this point in my career, I don't know how that is being used, but I imagine just in the 25 years since I was doing my field work on this language and in my doctoral program, so much has come so far. And it's so much easier to document and share and have people collaborate. So I have I mentioned my 240 hours of video cassette. If that had all been, digital, and I could easily share and ask people to collaborate on the translation and the transcription of terminology that I don't know, because it's a language that I didn't grow up with. And there are 4 different languages that my participants were speaking. There are so many different ways that today, that our technology today can make an impact. And so I'll also be very curious to see how AI is helping create dictionaries and helping with understanding and connecting people. But it's about connecting the humans around this subject. And I think we just have to always keep our eyes on the role of humans in the process, but also them as being the end users and recipients of what we're doing. So
you're true. We are the end users. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the chat or the AI narrative. Is like, who's the end user? It's us.
Right. So what do we need? And sometimes we need human connection, and, to not lose that completely. I don't want, I want to make sure that there always is a role for humans in everything that we do, and certainly in language, and certainly in research.
Now I'm going to be cognizant of every time I say and how I'm saying it.
But as long as you're speaking to people that speak your language, both literally and metaphorically and literally, it's fine. But when you're speaking to somebody else and you say who doesn't speak English natively,
or even the tone, like your tone of how you say at some point you're going to see Chat GPT or someone say like, okay, in this context means these feelings,
right,
and in this tone, and you're like, okay, that's too far.
Or means this, but no means that.
Right. Hilarious. Well, so if you have one final takeaway for all of our market researchers out there, what's your like, if you can remember one thing, what is this? What is
it? That culture matters and nuance matters, and to see beyond just the words of translation and think about the bigger picture, so that you can get the insights that really matter to you and your end clients.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Jill, for being here. We really appreciate all your insights and your just like little drops of wisdom. I know I learned a lot, which is why I love doing Live with Dan. And if you are going to be, for all of our watchers out there, we will be have like 3 episodes this month. So we've got a lot of people lined up. So make sure you tune in every Friday at 11 a.m. Central. And then we also have CX webinars, employee experience webinars, and a Question Pro office hours coming up. So I got to plug these. And so we just want to thank everyone for tuning in and watching today. And thank you, Jill. We really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it.
Have a good Friday.
Thanks.